Hi there. My name is Catherine and this is me. Well, not actually me. Really, it's a representation. A paper puppet that has been made to look a little like me. You get the idea. But don't worry, I'll throw in a couple of pictures to ground this video in some kind of reality. Some will even be in black and white, which is perfect since this video is for a history course after all. Anyway, I want to talk about my grandparents and their stories. This is more of a challenge than it might seem. As I think we're all aware of by now, telling stories involves a lot of choices. What do I include? Or even harder, exclude? How can I best give you a sense of what I want to say while still respecting the constraints of time and the medium I've chosen? Creating and editing always involves a certain amount of destruction, and this is something I have to deal with. But for me, it's still worth a try. So here it goes. This is my Oma and Opa on their wedding day on June 10th, 1951. They lived on the family farm in the middle of nowhere, Manitoba. Ever heard of Sturpern? Vida? Maybe Tolstoy? My point exactly. My parents eventually moved from the bustling city of Winnipeg to the family farm, so I was lucky enough to live right across the road from my grandparents on my dad's side. Naturally, they figure pretty prominently in my childhood memories. My Opa was a pretty cool guy. I think you'd like him. It was hard not to. He was a great improviser and could almost always find a way to fix a problem with whatever materials he had on hand. Honestly, I think half the farm is held together with baling twine. He was also a great storyteller, and many of his tales of growing up in rural Manitoba have become part of our family lore. One of my favorites involves a Halloween prank some of the boys in the area were planning on one of my Opa's neighbors, Mr. Miller. As the boys were making their way to the farm to do their mischief, Mr. Miller saw them coming. He grabbed his shotgun, snuck up behind them, and shot over their heads to give them a scare. After chasing them around for a little bit, he invited them inside the house where they chatted over coffee. My Oma was pretty great too. She was an incredibly warm and welcoming person, but was pretty fierce when she needed to be. There's a story in our family that she once got rid of some rats that had gotten into the chicken coop by trapping them in a corner and then stomping on them. You didn't mess with my Oma. She had a pretty rough life growing up. She was born in the Ukraine in 1922 and was the middle child in a family of 6 siblings. Her family experienced the deportation of kulaks to labor camps, the collectivization of farms, and the Second World War. At one point, when my Oma was about 9 or 10, the whole family wound up in a labor camp in the Ural Mountains. They were just dropped off in the middle of nowhere and left to survive on their own. While she and her brother and sisters were soon released, and her mother managed to escape, which is an incredible story, by the way, her father eventually died in the camp, probably from starvation or disease. My Oma told me that when her mother finally made it back to the children, she had to pretend to be their aunt. The older children, of course, knew the truth, but they had to keep the younger ones in the dark in order to avoid disaster should someone question them about their mother being around. My great-uncle cried when he told me he didn't recognize her when she first came home, and how painful that must have been for her. After the war, my Oma immigrated to Canada in 1949, where she met and married my Opa. Most of her family followed her, save 2 sisters who had been caught on the eastern side of the Iron Curtain at the end of the war. Oma wouldn't see them again until the 1980s. When I was in high school, my Oma had a stroke, and it suddenly became very urgent to piece together her story. So I started speaking to extended family and interviewing her while she was in the personal care home in Vida. It was a long process and I knew nothing about how to conduct an oral history interview. I didn't even record our conversations. Oh, and my dad had to help out because sometimes she felt more comfortable speaking in German and he had to translate. It wasn't an ideal interview situation, but it was so worth it. Now, of course, this is only a taste of who my grandparents were and the kinds of stories I remember from them. There's so much more I could tell you, but like I said, editing involves choices, and I had to make a lot of them. I couldn't tell their whole story even if I tried. First of all, my Oma and Opa naturally edited themselves in front of me and my siblings. And second of all, there are some stories I wouldn't want to tell. I truly believe my grandparents' stories have real historical worth, however you might want to define that. I could explain that my Opa's experiences speak to rural life and community in southern Manitoba, and that my Oma stories are representative of many people who survived living in Eastern Europe during the Second World War. Even so, you can probably tell that there's a heavy serving of nostalgia when I talk about them. I have deep emotional ties to these people and the stories they shared with me. I can't distance myself from their stories, and I wouldn't want to. Why are we so hard on nostalgia anyways? Because the real reason I want to tell my grandparents' stories is because I miss them. And do I really need any other justification? I guess that's up to you.